Okay, good evening. This is the real thing now. I am about to begin our Preface keynote event, and I hope you're all as excited as I am. Thank you for braving the rain. How are you all feeling tonight? You doing good? Okay. I have the pleasure of introducing the wonderful person who will introduce our keynote speaker, and that is our Chancellor, Chancellor Harris.
Oh my! I don't get that type of round of applause for my faculty, Colleen. No, just kidding. Thank you all so much for being here. Been at Upstate about 3.5 years, and not quite a half, but almost 3.5 years. And Preface has come to be one of the things that I really admire most about what we try to do with language and with literature and learning and exposure, particularly from a humanities perspective. So I appreciate this. So Colleen, thank you very much. Colleen, thank you very much for that introduction. And so I'm thrilled to be here to kick off this year's Preface Authors Night, a special event for our first year reading program at the University of South Carolina, Upstate. The Preface program introduces students to the joy of reading and how thinking critically and connecting with others through reading can help us all better approach complex issues in our communities, our nation, and the world. This year, the featured book is The Home Place, Memoirs of a Colored Man's Love Affair with Nature. This memoir by ornithologist J. Drew Lanham looks at his experiences growing up in the 1970s in the Edgefield County, South Carolina, his family home since slavery. The book, which explores themes of race, of identity, and belonging in the rural South, won the Southern Book Prize and the Reed Award, and was the finalist for the John Burroughs Medal. Dr. Lanham is now a naturalist, ornithologist, and the professor of Clemson at Clemson University. So we are so pleased to be hosting him today for Preface Author Night, and we thank him for taking the time to be with our students and discuss his work. Please join me in giving him a very warm Spartan round of applause and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Chancellor Harris and Colleen, for that warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. I wanted to share a couple of pieces. First of all, to thank you all for engaging the home place. It's an important piece, obviously, to me because it's a memoir. That is an autobiography. My life written by me. So a narrative of self. And so I'll share a little bit of that. And then hopefully you will have questions. I'll tell you that no question is off limits. I promise 100% response. Now that's different than an answer, right? So we'll go that route and hopefully have a little bit of discussion. Frederick Douglass said, "I prefer to be true to myself, even at the hazard of incurring the ridicule of others, rather than to be false and incur my own abhorrence. I am a man in love with nature. I am an eco-addict, consuming everything that the outdoors offers in its all-you-can-sense seasonal buffet. I am a wildling, born of forests and fields and more comfortable on unpaved back roads and winding woodland paths than in any place where concrete and asphalt doom it. In my obsession, I celebrate myself and sing myself, living Walt Whitman's exaltations, rolling and reveling in all that nature lays before me. I am an ornithologist, wildlife ecologist and college professor. I am a father, a husband, son, and brother. I hope to some I am a friend. I bird, I hunt, I gather. I am a seeker and a noticer. I am a lover. My being finds its foundation in open places. Yes, I am a man of color, African American by politically correct convention, mostly Black by virtue of ancestors who trod ground in Central and West Africa before being brought to these foreign shores. In me, there's additionally an inkling of Irish, a bit of Brit, a smidgen of Scandinavian, and some American Indian, Asian, and a bit of Neanderthal tossed in too. But that's only a part of the whole. There is also the red of miry clay plowed up and planted to pass legacy forward. There is the brown of spring floods rushing over a Savannah River shoal. There is the gold of ripening tobacco drying in the heat of summer's last breath. There are endless rows of cotton's cloudy white. My plumage then is a kaleidoscopic rainbow of an eternal hope in the deepest blue of despair and darkness. All of these hues then are me, and I am, in the deeper sense, colored. I am as much a scientist as I am a Black man. My skin defines me no more than my heart does, but somehow, my color often casts my love affair with nature in shadow. Being who and what I am doesn't fit the common calculus. I find myself the rare bird, the oddity, appreciated by some for my different perspectives and discounted by others as an unnecessary nuisance, an unusually colored fish out of water. But in all my time wandering, I've yet to have a wild creature question my identity. Not a single cardinal or ovenbird has ever paused in dawn song declaration to ask the reason for my being. White-tailed deer seem just as put off by my hunter friends' whiteness as they are by my Blackness. Responses in forests and fields are not born of any preconceived notion of what should be. They lie only in the fact that I am. Each of us, then, is so much more than the pigment that orders us into convenient compartments of occupation, of avocation, or behavior. It's way too easy to default to expectation, and nature shows me a better, wilder way. With that, I resist the easy paths and claim the implausible, the indecipherable, and celebrate the unconventional. What is wildness, you might ask? To be wild is to be colorful, and in the claims of colorfulness, there's an embracing and a self-acceptance. We scientists are trained to be comfortable with the multiple questions that each new revelation elicits. Like sweet gum trees which find a way to survive in the face of every attempt to exclude them, the questions we ask are persistent resprouts, largely uncontrollable. There really aren't hard and fast answers to most questions, though. Wildness means living in the unknown. Time is teaching me to extend the philosophies of science to my life. to accept the mystery and embrace the next query as an opportunity for another quest. I find solace, inspiration, and exhilaration in nature. Issues out there are boiled down to the simplest imperative: survive. Sometimes my existence seems to hang in the balance of challenges, professional and personal, external and internal. What allows me to survive day to day is having nature as my guide. But I worry as the survival of many of the wild things and places themselves seem increasingly uncertain. Called by something inside, I have joined with kindred, wandering, wondering watchers and ecologically enlightened spirits in the mission to keep things whole. After all my years of being the scientist, idea generator, objective data gatherer, I yearn for more than statistical explanations. My colleagues and I have mostly done a poor job of reaching the hearts and minds of those who don't hold advanced degrees with ologies at the end. We tend to take multidimensional arrays of creatures, places, and interwoven lives and boil them down into the flat pages and prose of obscure journals most of you will never read. Those tomes are important, but the sin is leaving the words to die there pressed between the pages. As knowledge molders in the stacks, the public goes on largely uninformed about the wild beings and places that should matter to all of us. Science's tendency to make the miraculous mundane is like replacing the richest artistry with paint-by-number portraits. In the current climate of scientific sausage making and denial, we grind data through complex statistical packages and then encase it in a model that often has little chance of making it to the real world. In all of that, we are losing touch. How inspiring is the output that prescribes some impossible task? How practical is it? We must rediscover the art in conservation and reorient towards doing and not talking. So you might ask, what do I live for? I eventually realized that to make a difference, I had to step outside into creation and refocus on the roots of my passion. If an ounce of soil, a sparrow, or an acre of forest is to remain, then we must all push things forward. To save wildlife and wild places, the traction has to come not from the regurgitation of bad news data, but from the poets, from the prophets, from the preachers, the professors, and possibly some president who have always dared to inspire. Heart and mind cannot be exclusive of one another in the fight to save anything. To help others understand nature is to make it breathe like a giant, revolving, evolving, celestial being, with the ecosystems acting as organs and the living things within those places, us included, as cells vital to its survival. My hope is that somehow I might move others, maybe you, to find themselves magnified in nature, whomever and wherever they might be. So I hope you recognize that. That's how the home place starts. It's me, a prologue. So when I began to write this book back in 2004, how many of you were born in 2004? Okay, you don't have to raise your hands and tell on yourself. Very few of you. And so here we are in 2024, 20 years hence. And when I was writing that book, the first chapter that I actually wrote was The Home Place. And I wrote that in a writing workshop at a tiny college in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont called Sterling College. Enrollment at the time was 123 students, 123. But going to that place far away from home allowed me to revisit home in ways that I never could here. And so every time I get to share the home place with someone, and here having the honor of being your freshman read, and today being the day after a pretty special day, I thought I would share, because there's always a question, and I hope that you have this question, and maybe I will answer this question for some of you. Why would you write this? Why would you write this? Why would you write this book? And what in the world does it have to do with me? And so I want to share with you this piece, and I really want you to think hard, right? How many of you are writers? Awesome. How many of you are poets? Okay. Now, I know there are way more poets in here than John. You didn't raise your hand either time. Okay, there he is. My friend John Lane back there. So in thinking about why we do what we do, how many of you are artists? All right, writers and poets, raise your hand again, too. All right. So this could be an essay that was written by any creator, any creative. And appropriately, it's entitled, Why We Write. How do the writer's words impact crisis? How do prose and verse, long or short, rhymed or not, evenly lined or raggedly torn, help us cope in times of struggle? Some might argue that art is the privilege we can ill afford to partake of in these critical times. I would posit the opposite. You see, the crises now are simply exacerbated by other crises. Bad, too frequently compounded by worse. From infections of a pandemic to microaggressions to murder openly enacted on public streets, to extinction, to climate change, to politicians seeding treason, to denial of identities, national trends of disparity, marking entire races with at-risk status, wars and rumors of wars, atrocities exacted that blind us to shared humanity beyond religion. How can words possibly help? I would argue, as many far greater before me have, see Thoreau or Truth, Whitman, Lincoln, King, Carson, Harjo, Baldwin, Angelou, Momaday, Peacock, Lane, Seattle. Maybe others of you here would argue that silence is the much deeper sin. To not write or speak or yell or scream, to not paint or dance or carve or sculpt or sing, is a dereliction of our duty as creatives. There is a silver-plated lining, though, in this dark cloud hovering over us. You see, it is Groundhog Day again for those of us who thought history would be made with a different kind of president. But I profess my disappointment in status quo winning again. To me, it's not such a great thing. My heart, though broken, is bared plain on my left sleeve. I'll stand up, I'll dust off, and I'll continue the good fight. But now to the creative's task under dire circumstances as I see it. We have a job to leverage against hopelessness and complacency. For all that's being dismantled and destroyed, beauty still exists and occasionally prevails. It is my work as a nature writer and poet to expose both bitter and sweet. That savory ecotone is the writing that I see, whether by social media that can be a megaphone, ready and waiting. After all, hate has been slung daily and will be slung from powerful places by people who'd rather things be great in ways that exclude, ban, deny, and destroy. Lives and fortunes will rise and fall on single words, misused and misspelled. We hang too often in the balance of idiocy and intolerance. And so, if malformed thoughts spill from hateful mouths, can tilt the earth lopsided on its socio-political axis, then we creatives cannot sit on our many-hued hands to allow the polemics of ignorance and vanity to outpace the prose and poetics of societal recalibration towards justice and equity, towards revering and respecting nature rather than exploiting it. For those of us who've been wrapped in crisis since the ships first anchored off mid-Atlantic shore in 1619, not a theory, fact. Or the New World rediscovered to be desecrated circa 1491, thoughts and words spoken, written, and passed on are all that some of us possess. These cannot be chained, chatteled, sold, and stolen away. And so in the tradition of diasporas and disenfranchised people seeking simple connection free of bias and persecution, we have the responsibility to speak out as loudly as we can to work towards undermining the crises where we might. Some of us are fated to the virulence of racism by different and darker hued skin. Others persecuted because of other discernible differences or maybe identities not on the binarily linear scale. Even as privilege pushes pigeonholing our writing can make a difference. And so of those afflicted and aggrieved or of those unhampered and free to achieve, there is the necessary action of thinking and feeling given over to our voices, written and spoken. Maybe it's passed on in exchanges of workshops at conferences, around campfires and coffee houses and pubs, perhaps here at Upstate in classrooms or some safe spot on campus. I can assure you, Spartans, of this. Silence will be the choice that kills us all doornail dead as surely as any germ or chokeholding assault. Silence is acquiescence. It is a deadly gun, mortally aimed. It is an assault on sacred, self-actualized sensibility. Many want to clear-cut our old-growth wisdom, call names, and lay waste to plant a vision of what they think should be for a few. They would have us planted in homogenized rows, to have bad be not so bad and the rough truth smoothed over to comfort folks unwilling to deal with the uncomfortable. But here you are in this university to learn. This is where the work we do becomes critical. We writers have a responsibility to push back. Words offer a singularity of immediate action that can be as powerful as any protest. That must be the potency in our craft now, to use the tools laying in front of us to be irrepressibly loud, to be boisterous, to be bold, to tell our stories however we can. To not wait on the privilege of glossy publication and peer review. So update status. Let your heart show. Get out of your heads, but don't leave your brain behind on the journey, please. Speak in whatever way you can some daily truth artfully expressed in micro-rebellion pushed hard against the machine. Disagree with somebody at some point. Peaceably so. What we do then in our creative task is as essential as clean water. It's as necessary as unfettered breath. It's as reviving as wildness. Voting is a gerund derived from a verb. Want better? Take action now. Don't wait for the next election cycle. This is the activist nature of our writing. So let's get out to do it. Don't wait on the perfect place, the perfect time, the perfect convergence at the appointed moment. Scratch and scribble on napkins. Craft in the crack of your day. Tap out essays and poetry on your phones. Time is of the essence. And nature teaches us, if we slow our haste to pay attention, that urgency becomes time concentrated into purpose. So current issues are always at hand. We make choices by ballot that will impact the lives of generations to come. That is your choice. So, here we are. Some will want to cancel me. Do so if you will. I'll know then, like Baldwin and Giovanni and Walker and others, that I'm on the righteous path. We shouldn't have to measure courage by spell check and word count, or take the joy of book fairs away from third graders because we fear exposure beyond parental dogma. But that is where we find ourselves, in such a sad, sad space. Beware, they will come for your favorite books next. So be brave, young Spartans. Do not have the way paved for you by those who would limit your journeys to where they want you to go. Instead, blaze your own trails and make the way easier for others behind you to follow. So you didn't read that in the book. And it is an important piece, I think, for me, for any writer, for any creative, to make the declaration of why we do what we do. I mean, I could ask each of you why you come to university. How many of you ask yourselves that question on a daily basis? How many of you ask yourselves that after a chemistry test? Right. Or some hardship, some perceived struggle. But it should be a constant question, why? I mean, the how is really pretty easy. Put in the work, study, get the grade. Those are the mechanics of it. But the why is the issue. So for me as a writer, why do I write? Why would I write a book about myself? It seems an exercise in ego aggrandizement. Why would I say colored? Well, for one thing, quite honestly, I wanted people to pick the book up. I hope that they were somehow offended by it. So I hope that you have professors and people who push you. And sometimes that pushing means you need to be provoked. Sometimes, as we stand in front of you, telling you what we think, you should raise your hand and say, well, you know, this is sort of what I think. And we can have a discussion about this. So I look forward to your questions. I look forward to your comments. I'm honored to be your keynote. I'm honored that the home place has hopefully found a space in your head, and maybe eventually it works its way to your heart. So thank you, Spartans, for your time, and I'm looking forward to seeing all these hands go up with questions. Thank you. There's back here and then here, or there and
We have 2 microphones, so when all your hands go up, we'll be ready.
Once we've learned the lessons that are within this book, what can we do with them in terms of application?
Great question. I think that the question was, again, how to apply the book, right? And I think one of the things we seek as writers, as creative nonfiction writers and poets, I think, is empathy, or at least sympathy, so that you feel something about it. about what the words say. But then the empathy, that next step is to feel something in common with it. And so even as different as we might be in some ways, to find common ground. And if you find common ground with something, you have a means to apply empathy. And if you can apply empathy, you exercise something that I'm beginning to call guerrilla love. And it's a person by person sort of strategy, because we can judge one another outwardly, right? And we see where that gets us. But when we can speak with someone, when there is some common ground that you may have found in the home book, maybe it's where you're from or something that appeals to you in the words or somehow that you've lived, and you can find that common ground. So for me to get a note from, an 80-something-year-old white lady in the Nebraska Sandhills who tells me that she found common ground in the book with me means that the words have stretched across a geography, across generations, across all kinds of differences that may exist to strike somebody. And that's sort of an application that I would like to see. You're welcome.
Yes. I know you talked about deer and all that. What's the biggest white lake between?
Oh my God. In South Carolina?
In general.
I have never gotten that question. And so you want like an antler score? Is that what you want?
Yes, please.
So when we talk about antler, so this is hunter speak. So the chapter of Jawbone is about a very old white-tailed deer that I killed, that I hunted and killed, and then we ate. And that deer green scored right around 130 something. It was a 5.5+ year old deer. And at that point in time, it was the biggest deer I'd ever seen because it looked like a little pony. It only weighed 180 pounds, but it had been run down in the rut. So, I would guess at some point that deer probably weighed nearly 200 pounds. And so it's hard for me to get that deer out of my head. I have a friend who keeps showing me pictures on his game camera of deer. His son, Hunter, just killed a Kansas whitetail at green scored 148 inches and weighed 225 pounds. So there you go. How about you? Big deer?
Oh, I haven't found that many, but my biggest is a 12-point. I got it in Kansas.
Nice. Did it taste good?
Yeah.
All right, there you go. That's by the way, that's the hunting question comes infrequently, but it's important because for many of us, it's a food chain issue. You can grow your own onions or you can eat them on a quarter pounder. Which would you prefer? Okay. Take your chances. Soil that you dig your hands into and pull that root out, or having them prepackaged on that. Yeah, anyway.
I grew up in Aiken in like the woods, and I spent a lot of time outside, and just like you did when you were younger. How do you feel about, as parenting changes, kids are on like tablets and iPads and inside all the time? How do you think that will affect ornithology and how that will change children wanting to be outside and study birds and all that? What are your thoughts on that?
What part of Aiken?
I went to Schofield, so yeah, off of Highway 19.
Oh, I know. I went to Schofield 9th and 10th grade.
No, I meant like where I live.
Oh, okay, so off of Highway 19. Yeah, okay, know it well. I think, I used to be one of those people, and my wife would tell you, she would maybe describe me as a Luddite, because in teaching ornithology, I was one of those people. I was like, don't take your phone out into the field. But then the advent of field guides on phones and apps on phones, and plus you have a great camera on your phone, it's unreasonable to expect people to detach from something that's such an important part of their lives. So rather than push people away from their comfort zone, take your comfort with you. Because you're able to take pictures, you're able to look up in a field guide not just what the bird might be, and there are apps now that will actually tell you what a bird is with some degree of reasonable certainty. But I think that if we leverage it the right way, if we leverage technology the right way, that it can actually be, again, a help more than a hindrance. It's when we go to depend on it and we would rather put on the VR goggles to go outside than step outside, that I think we're in danger of settling for nature and the convenience of virtual nature rather than feeling nature for itself. So there are lots of great places in Aiken to watch birds. Do you go? You go to...
My grandparents have a lot of land, so I used to spend a lot of time like down in the creeks and all that. I used to see a lot of birds, snakes, stuff like that.
Very nice. Yeah, Aiken's. Unfortunately, the storm did a lot of damage in Aiken that people have not heard about. So hopefully your family was safe. And
we didn't have power for like a week and a half.
Yeah.
We didn't get it as bad as a lot of other.
Good.
We didn't get trees in our house.
Good. Back here.
From writer to writer, I'm writing a book right now. What are some tips that you would have for me to, just tips in general for me?
Awesome. Well, congratulations on the blessing and the curse of a book. My friend John Lane, who is a great author, can probably give you more tips than me. You're on number what, John? 30 something? And he is a machine. I call him the Lane train. But it depends on what you're writing. What genre are you in?
It's very hard to explain. It's kind of a mix of a lot. It's based around revenge.
Huh. See, okay. Let me measure this word. I think because I deal primarily in first-person narrative, so memoir, almost anything that I write is going to come back to first person because I say that's the data set that I know best. And so though people can question my data set, I will always be able to say, well, yeah, but this is what I experienced. And so for the writer to be able to put themselves sort of in a place, I think is important. Even as I sort of, dip my toe in fiction, I found that even in fiction, as I wrote about birds and enslaved people in John James Audubon, that I found myself inserting bits and pieces of my knowledge about birds into someone that I created. And so to find a way, again, it almost goes back to the first question about empathy. If you can find a way to put yourself in the story so that you begin to live the story in some way. I mean, for a memoir, obviously, that's pretty easy. But even in a memoir, you begin to question your memories. And I would warn anybody who's writing memoir, you have to be careful about how you sort of truth check your perspective. I mean, you have to do it sometimes, but from the point of view of just writing in general, I tend to be a person who I like to write within the tension of a story. So I find dissonance maybe between events or histories or even perspectives, and then work in between the point A and point B. And that's where the stories lie. And the other thing I think is the art of writing between the lines. So as you write, how do you have the reader find other stories? So that it makes a narrative arc, not just a linear thing. So I don't know if that makes sense. The other thing, workshops help sometimes. If you've never been to a writing workshop, be careful about where you go. Make sure it's sort of that you find a good place for you. But the other thing as a writer is to find community. Find in John and Betsy and Hub City books. How many people have been to Hub City? Okay, you need to go there. It's down on Daniel, right? So finding a community of writers is a critical thing. And I would never have thought that until there are these, John and I talk most days and we can talk about writing. I have other friends and we talk about it. So you'll find that especially in the depths of a book can be a very lonely place. So to be able to spin out of that at times and to have people that you trust with your work, and you have to be careful with that, right? But people that you trust with your work who can share and give you feedback, then that becomes a totally different kind of process. Also, read to yourself and listen to yourself. You need to understand what your voice literally sounds like. So you have to move outside of the writer at times and become the reader. And if you can understand that and put all those in play, then I think hopefully that will help you.
What are the small things that we can other than the book? What are the small things that we can do in our daily life to push forward things like conservation and stuff like that? Just the considerations that we should have that most people wouldn't know.
I'll tell you, I did this one day. Thank you for the question. I teach a class called Conservation Biology. I used to. It have about 80 students in it, and it was the second week of class, and I had asked, and this was like the week after a football game or something, and so I asked folks. We were talking, and I said, "So how many people on the way to class today picked up a piece of garbage or something recyclable and put it in a bin?" And out of the 80 people, maybe 5 people raised their hands. And I gave them 20 points on their next test. I said, boom, there you go. So time goes by, and you can see people sitting on the edge of their seats waiting to be asked. About another, 3-4 weeks passed, and I asked the question again. And 60, 70 hands went up, right? And I applauded, but there were no points. So then it came one more time, right? And I asked, and this was a little experiment, so people were guinea pigs. I didn't go through an IRB for this, Janice, I just did it. And I asked the question again, and fewer hands went up, and I gave 5 points on the next quiz. And those people who had exercised some sort of conservation conscience for the points, my point was to them that it ought to be an internal motivation without reward. So, on the way to class, rather than stepping over a piece of trash, pick it up. Do that. It's an easy way to make the world lighter in some way. I think for me, conservation is also about humanity, and it's how we treat one another. Okay. And so, seeing, being kind or finding that kindness, to me is a way, again, to move empathy beyond yourself into other beings and then maybe somebody else feels good enough to do something that makes the world better. And if you make the world better human by human, I think you make the world better for wild things and vice versa. So I think it's an interconnected thing, but don't just step over a piece of trash. I'm not saying you got to carry around a baggie and a stick with a nail in it, but just do one little thing. Just do that one little thing, and you'll feel better about yourself, and you'll feel better maybe about the possibilities. Is this another deer question?
No.
Okay.
So I know when you've been like hunting all that, you've ran into a lot of snakes. Have you ever been chased by a black racer?
No. Well, okay. Okay, so snakes. I've got lots of snake stories. Have not been chased by a snake. And that's, we can get into sort of the I don't know why they are called old wives' tales, because I think old husbands were telling these stories too. But now the snakes that might be aggressive enough to pursue a person aren't supposed to be in this country. So like a black mamba they're seriously territorial, they aren't here unless somebody's got one in a bin under their bed or it's escaped from a zoo. But we have lots of black rat snakes on our farm, and they're important. And some of these snakes initially were inside the house, apparently on a fairly regular basis, because you would find the sheds in the basement. Well, we sealed up those holes, Janice, so they're not they're not there anymore. But to see those snakes means that I'm going to see fewer rodents because they're a natural pest control. And so you learn to have them as neighbors in a way, as long as they don't want to be too close. The one black racer I've seen on the property, it was so eager to be away from me, but they're just beautiful. The word, I'm going to give you a new word for fast snakes. It's a beautiful word, cursorial. Cursorial. And so black racers are cursorial in that they are active hunters. During the daylight, they have these big eyes. John knows a lot about snakes. He's a herpetologist himself. But you'll see them often with their heads raised. I mean, I've seen a black racer, almost a foot of it raised up, almost cobra-like, not with a hood, but just looking. And then they'll drop and then they'll hunt. But they have no interest in chasing you. And that's one of the reasons that snakes have been persecuted. So when you see a snake, don't handle it. Watch it from a distance and understand that it's a critical part of an ecosystem, of your ecosystem. And if you can choose, you can have rodents that may come in your house, or you can have snakes that may come in your house, but we'll keep the rodents out. So I prefer to have the snakes rather than the rodents. You've been chased by a snake?
Yes, I have. Quite a few times. Especially trout fishing. Like down the Green Creek, I've been chased by people.
So, I mean, what happens? Probably water snakes, I would guess.
There were black racers that were along the bank, but I've seen a lot of water moccasins and copperheads down there as well.
Yeah, what happens if you're still and you're being chased by a black? They're not venomous. What would happen?
You run zigzags, so they stop chasing.
But what would happen if you were still? If you just said, okay, woosah snake, right?
I've seen them by my dad before, so usually they'll leave you alone. But
You'd be heroic, right? Then you'd become like the snake guy, and then you could write a story about it. and then you'd be like famous for the guy who just stood as the black racer comes up to you and has a conversation. I write that, right? What would a snake say to you? It can't eat you. It can't swallow you. It can't constrict you to death, at least not black racers. So use that, right? Next time I challenge you, stand your ground with a snake. And I promise you, but a black racer is not really. Now, if you handle a black racer, John, a black racer is going to bite you, 9 times out of 10 if you handle it. Because they just aren't snakes that like to be handled. A black rat snake going to bite you half the time. You know, a milk snake, hardly ever. But one of the things, you know, you've heard the story of a snake swallowing its tail to roll after people. Have you heard that one? That's the one my grandmother used to tell. And she told me to run in a zigzaggy line too. And I never did. And I've not been chased by snakes. So use that. Use it.
All right, thank you.
Have there been times where you've wanted to change what you wrote in the book after it was published?
Oh man, yes, like right now. When I wrote that book back in the early 2000s up through, 2009, and things were very different with my family at that point, and so as family has evolved or devolved or changed, how do you forward a story? So right now, what's going on with the home place is 2026 will be the 10th anniversary of the book's publishing. So I'm writing a couple of chapters for that 10th anniversary edition. And those chapters will allow me to address some of what's happened to the home place, to family, and sort of my feelings about it. So one of the things that writers do when we're reading frequently is that we are doing sort of line edits. You might read something one way to one audience and read it another way to another audience. And so also when you hear words that you have written, sometimes you say, well, why didn't I use this word? And so you might change it. So if you ever have a chance to look at a reading copy of a paper copy from some story, you'd be amazed at how many times a writer will change something in the story, in the writing, because of how it sounds, or maybe things change over time. So yeah, even like with my 23andMe, 23andMe, the science is changing things like every other week, it seems. So it's much less Scandinavian now and more French and German. So, I have to go back and think about those kinds of things. So there are small things like that, but then there are huge things like shifts in narrative that I want to change. So great question. Do you write? Well, maybe you will. All right.
This is not a question, but just my teacher reflection. Your writing has inspired some of the best personal narratives I've received in 25 years of teaching. And so it is magic, and the students have talked so much about the quality of your prose, the poetic quality of your prose, and they've been able to sort of dive deep, and I've seen the influence of your work in their writing. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Thank you. That means a lot, right? Because in this whole why I write, ultimately, a purist writes just to write, but I think all of us want to be read, and to be read and to have influence on thinking and feeling, but then the act of writing itself is a critical thing. I know John has had a great influence on how I write and how I think. And so that makes me feel good to know that. So thank you for that. And I appreciate you guys writing these narratives. So, keep at it. With birds, I like to say that everybody has a bird story, even if it's the chicken you ate last night or the pigeon that found your car. That's a bird story. So never discount your story Never think your story is not good enough. I mean, how many other people in here have been chased by snakes? Oh, okay, so 2, so 3, 4. It's like so now see, you've got a workshop circle. It can be, you can have a workshop on snake chasing. But then again, you know, that narrative, your story is powerful. So write as a way of exercising your mind and your heart. And it can lead you to some very special places. It can lead you to some painful places, right? How many people in here keep journals? Okay. And you know what writing means to you. So I hope you raised your hand when I asked if you're a writer, because that practice is an important thing. I journal mostly on social media, quite honestly, right? It's sort of a way of exercising my mind and what I'm feeling about something. And I can go back and I can actually look at what I've written and sort of trace a history. How many of you are on social media? Oh, go back and do that. If you have an opportunity, go back and trace what you've written and what you've posted. You'd be surprised, right? Facebook used to do this thing where it would give you a word cloud. They don't do that anymore, I think. But they would give you a word cloud every so often if you requested it. And it was really insightful to me because there were so many of my words in those word clouds that were aspirational. So I was reaching out in a way that I didn't understand, that I didn't know I was doing. So check on your writing. Write if you're not writing, and if you're writing now, write more. Yes, there are 2 in the back. There's one gentleman behind you and then the guy in front.
So it was actually the idea that you shared earlier where we needed an internal motivation without reward. Though life seems to be a game of sense and the manipulation of the sensorium. So how do we effectively create positive causes without cognitive awareness to the reward, the effect?
Wow. I think, the dissonance. Okay, so I'm gonna depend on John Lennon here. How many people are familiar with the song Imagine? Okay, so don't worry, y'all. I'm not gonna sing it, but it's Imagine there is no heaven, right? And the lyrics sort of take us on this trip of imagining there's no heaven, no hell. How would we be? So, from a spiritual or a faith tradition, how do you treat your fellow human being if there is no reward of paradise or no damnation of hell for doing it badly? Think about that, right? So what's your motivation? What's the carrot, so to speak? And different philosophies would lead you to would have different carrots in front of you. And so, to have a movement with, I think about the long term of movement. What was the carrot for King writing letters from a Birmingham jail? What was that carrot? Was it a carrot to feed himself? So, what was the carrot for? How many people have heard of Henry David Thoreau? Okay, so Thoreau's this white guy, lived for a year on a pond in Concord, Massachusetts, a couple of miles from his parents' home, but that's another story. But when his book, the most famous book, was being published that week, instead of being on the stump about his book and selling his book, which is a carrot, right? That's a tangible reward. What was Henry David Thoreau angry about? And what was he on the stump talking about? Something called the Fugitive Slave Act. So he was ticked off because I believe it was the mayor of Boston, may have been the mayor of Concord, but for some reason I'm thinking Boston, had the Fugitive Slave Act gave legal cause to re-enslave people even in free states. So if you've ever seen the movie 12 Years a Slave, that's what happened. So imagine somebody, a free person, being taken off the street and being sold into slavery. So Thoreau, the carrot for Thoreau, the carrot for MLK, the carrot for many activists as they write, because from that comes the most important piece, I think, that Henry David Thoreau wrote, called Civil Disobedience. And so when I have people study Thoreau, the first thing I want them to read is Civil Disobedience. And what's the carrot for civil disobedience? What, to be put in jail? To be punished? That's not a carrot. So that motivation that comes from within to see better for those beyond yourself, I think is a motivation for a movement. You know, you see, I mean, we've all seen it, right? People join a march so they can get selfies of themselves being in the march, and then they don't do anything after that. So, you know, I think that in what we call an endogenous or intrinsic drive is important. And what's added to that, if there is recognition or if there's publication, that's why in writing I tell people, don't wait for publication. If your goal as a writer is just to be published, you're probably going to be disappointed in some ways. You can be productive in doing it, but it becomes such a transactional thing as a writer. And that's what some writers do, right? They have to write on spec or, to earn money. But what is the internal drive for doing anything? That's why I say, ask yourselves from time to time, why am I doing what I'm doing? I mean, I was in an engineering major for 3.5 years suffering because other people wanted me to be in that major, and I was not courageous enough to see my own path forward. So I suffered really in and out of depression for 3.5 years until I had enough of an endogenous drive to spin out of that. So, you know, how you go about something, and why am I doing a thing? Are you in college? Are you at university to learn, to expand your mind, or are you here to get a job? Or are you looking for a career? I mean, honestly, I think universities are sort of overpopulated now in ways because people just figure it's the thing to do after I graduate from high school. I wish the opportunities for gap year had existed before I came to college. Gap year is sort of a privileged thing, I think, but I think there were ways, there will be ways again, hopefully, for the government to assist people in gap years. What, for example, if your gap year is an AmeriCorps year, and you get to go to some cool place, or maybe you stay in your hometown and you do things to help your hometown out. Imagine being an AmeriCorps intern or volunteer, and you're put to work helping after Helene. What would you learn in that year about yourself, about what it is that you really want to do? To sort of grow up in a way. So I think, again, that endogenous drive that many creatives feel is what causes people to dance when there's nobody looking, to sing to the top of your lungs when there's nobody to hear or clap for you. So I think that's important. I hope that gets at sort of the question that you're asking, but I think endogenous drive is critical for what we do. Yes, you can yell it out.
I'm kind of just curious, how many times
Oh, it was really Wile E. Coyote-like. Because I would really, it was dangerous. I would watch Wile E. Coyote do stuff, and I would say, okay, this is what he did wrong. And then I would figure that, if I could produce more thrust, so if I could run faster, so I would do that and jump off of things. Again, I did. I had wings made of cardboard, and because one of the things I love doing is when I was was in the back seat of the car, if you put your hand out the window, right, your hand becomes an airfoil, and you can feel the lift in your hand. And so then I would take the cardboard and I would like bend it, but I didn't understand aerodynamics. So the number of times I couldn't count. A lot. And it wasn't just roofs, it was haystacks. There was this one hill. There was this guy growing up, this daredevil named Evel Knievel. And it was the most dangerous thing ever for kids, because Evel Knievel had this dirt bike, and he would jump over stuff like cars. And I didn't have a dirt bike, but I had a bicycle. And we were always trying to jump off of stuff, jump over stuff. I jumped out of swings a lot. Swing, and then jump. But that sensation of just sort of momentary, when you leave the apogee of the swing, and there's this moment of almost this feeling of weightlessness, in that at any moment you could just take off and fly. So, as I write about some of those things, I write about the kid who actually is swinging, takes off, and doesn't come down, right? So I wish I could count. I broke my collarbone jumping off of stuff. And my parents didn't know it apparently for a couple of 3 days, but I was carrying my shoulder like this because I didn't tell them. I just kept jumping off of stuff. You didn't do the same thing, did you?
I mean, I've jumped out of swings, but I've never broken it in the process.
Yeah. Trust me, you pay for it later. Yes.
Yeah. Who's some of your favorite musicians? Because every time I read or write something, I always like to connect the music that I'm listening to.
Oh, yeah.
Who's some of your favorite musicians?
Man, I love me some Pat Metheny. Pat Metheny group, Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays. Wow, so many. Sade, saw her in concert, and she's like a comet. She only tours like once now. It's like once every 12, 20 years. Yeah, so she may never tour again. So, I write to a lot of classical music. So Tchaikovsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, Aaron Copland. Oh, God. Grandma's Hands. Oh. Thank you for that. I have a list of artists who I wish I could have seen in concert, and Bill Withers is he's probably number one, because his voice was so strong and pure in a way. And so, yeah, Grandma's Hands. Well, thank you. Yeah, Yeah, Bill is, and you notice you don't find people trying to replicate Bill Withers. They'll sample.
I like listening to soul music.
Yeah. So Stevie, Songs in the Key of Life. Best album of all times is Marvin Gaye, What's Going On. Best album, hands down. Wow, thank you for that. That's new. I appreciate it. Here's a prompt. What does your life soundtrack look like? You got 10 to 12 cuts. So that's a prompt. I want that tomorrow morning at 8. No, just kidding. But just go on Spotify or wherever. I don't work for any of these people. But what's your name, sir? John. John is talking about writing, and it's very complimentary what the music that writing reminds him of. So think about what you listen to. Think about what your soundtracks are. And I find that I'm playing certain music for certain moods. Certain music for certain moods. So, yeah, there's wow, Bill Withers, man. There's I've got so much of his stuff on repeat, but it's a lot. I like listening to a lot of his stuff when I travel. Yeah, and right, and playing small venues, but you can find some of his live stuff, and his breath and his ability. His breathing is Pavarotti-like. So Lucian Pavarotti, yeah. So Nessun Dorma. Any of you into? I'm sorry. Listen to that. Expand. Listen to some opera, Puccini. Do that. No questions from Janice or Betsy or John? Okay.
With your fascination with flying and other stuff like that, have you ever done one of those wind-blowing columns, considered skydiving, done any zip lining, or there's these planes that, like, once they get to a really high height, drop altitude to create a zero-G-like environment? Have you ever considered trying to do any of that?
I have, but she's here, so I won't. No, I have, but the thing is that most of those things, they're like, oh, if you're gonna, for example, to tandem dive, I'm kind of a big guy, and so I've thought about doing I've thought about taking flying lessons. One of my favorite things to do is when I go to Alaska, I spend a lot of time in bush planes, and I'm usually in the co-seat, and to actually feel updrafts, to be able to feel every updraft, what some people would call turbulence on a big plane, is just flying. And so to feel those things come off of the side of a mountain, to be in the hands of a pilot that you are shoulder to shoulder with, and to have that yoke in front of you is sort of the next best thing to me. So I kind of think about that as the most thrilling flying that I've done. So yeah, that's as close as I've gotten. One back here, I think.
Okay, I forgot what chapter it was, but there was a chapter in Preface, and you talk about building model planes and how it correlates to like your obsession with flight.
Right.
If there's any hobbies that you have now that like kind of reminds you of your childhood.
I still love warbirds. So, those planes, and I think about the progression of flight from you think about Jefferson and Franklin saw one of the first balloon flights when they were in Paris, and then to go from there to sort of the commonality of balloon flight, but then you look at this expansion from the Wright brothers in 1903 to warplanes a decade later, right? And dropping bombs on people, and then warbirds, and then, so I follow that flight progression like I did as a kid. I haven't put a model plane together in a very long time. The hobby that has persisted with me has been watching birds. And so I think I watch birds in the same way that I did as a kid. I can become so transfixed that I lose time. and forget troubles. So, when I was a kid, I spent so much time outside because, I was probably avoiding things. So, birds allow me an escape, and they have always allowed me an escape. And so that's the consistent and persistent hobby that I practice as an adult now that I used to do as a kid. Thank you. I've been to Costa Rica once, to the Nicoya Peninsula, and I didn't, because I was guiding people, I was pointing out birds instead of watching them myself. What I want to do is I haven't been able to take a whole lot of trips where I was able to just sort of enjoy birds myself instead of being a bird dog for others. So I would love to go down and have the time sort of just by myself or with someone to just watch birds and immerse. But resplendent quetzal is a bird that's like a bird god. So have you spent time in Costa Rica?
Yes, so we went in June last, and we had an alligator safari, and there were a lot of birds that they were expanding, and it was fun to watch.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, John's left now, but he spent time, I think, in Costa Rica doing American crocodile research way back when. So, yes, yes, I will.
In terms of bird places, have you ever been to Botswana?
Yes. Now, I haven't been into the Okavango.
Yeah.
The time in Botswana was just short because we were spending time in the Kalahari or the Galagadi. And so that was my time there. But the Okavango is one of the places that I want to go. And that's where you see shoebills. And it's one of the wonders. I don't know if it was ever listed as one of the 8 wonders, but from when you think about that wetland and the expanse of it, and the biodiversity there, it's one of the places that I really do want to go. You been? Yeah. Hopefully that gets on the trip list sooner than later. So if you have a spot, let me know.
Time to plan to study abroad.
Yeah. Yes. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you for being patient. I really appreciate you.